My father's eyes rolled the moment I stepped into the courtroom. A flicker of contempt. That familiar, weathered disappointment crossed his face like a storm front, the same one I had weathered my entire life. But then the judge, a man whose face was a map of tired legal battles, lifted his head. His eyes found me, locked onto me, and his expression shattered. The pen in his hand froze midair. In a voice that was barely a whisper but cut through the suffocating silence, he breathed, "Is that her?" The gears of the entire courtroom ground to a halt. Lawyers paused, their mouths open. The clerk's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Even the bailiff, a monolith of a man, shifted his weight, the leather of his holster creaking like a ship in distress. My father's smug certainty, a fortress he'd inhabited for decades, wavered. A hairline crack appeared in the facade. They had no idea. They saw a retired officer, a daughter finally confronting a stubborn old man over a piece of land. They didn't see the truth I carried into that room, a weight heavier than any rucksack. They didn't know I had lived long enough to forget nothing, fought hard enough to remember everything. Every dawn on the Harland family farm was a ritual carved in the harsh Iowa landscape. For decades, I rose before the sun, a discipline my father had beaten into me. The chill of the heartland air was a physical presence, a blade that sliced through the old timbers of the house my great-grandfather built with his own hands after the war. The smell of scorched black coffee filled the kitchen, a bitter incense, while I ran a mental patrol of the fence lines, a habit ingrained even when I was half a world away, encased in desert camouflage. My mother, God rest her soul, used to say the land had a grip on you. My father, Colonel James Harland, retired, believed it held on to something colder: duty. He raised me not as a daughter, but as a soldier in a smaller, more brutal army. There were no hugs for a scraped knee, only the burn of push-ups on gravel. Tears were a tactical error, punished with more laps around the barn until my lungs felt like they were filled with fire. "Harlands don't break," he would bark, his voice as sharp and unforgiving as the medals pinned to his chest, relics from the jungles of Vietnam. My life was not built on softness. It was built on the punishing rhythm of orders, deployments, and the relentless pressure of proving myself in rooms filled with men who saw a woman in command as a weakness to be exploited. I poured 32 years of my life into the United States Army. I bled for it. I became Colonel Margaret Harland, commanding units in the scorched earth of Iraq and the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. I made decisions that kept soldiers alive, decisions that sent others home in flag-draped caskets. While I did that, my own life unraveled thread by thread. I became a ghost at birthdays, a disembodied voice on anniversaries. My marriage to David disintegrated under the immense pressure of my absence, a casualty of a war fought on two fronts. My children, my own flesh and blood, knew me only as the woman in the crisp uniform who called on holidays, her voice strained by static and distance. All of it, I told myself, every sacrifice, every lonely night, was to earn a single nod of respect from the man who now sat across the courtroom from me. The same man who once pinned my first lieutenant bars to my shoulders, his expression as hard and unreadable as granite. That October morning, just 2 months ago, was meant to be the end of the war. I had driven 8 hours straight from my retirement ceremony in Washington, the exhaustion in my bones a deep, physical ache that the weight of my duffel bag couldn't match. The golden fields of Iowa stretched into an infinite, aching horizon under a pale autumn sky. The corn was harvested, leaving a field of stubble that crunched under my boots like broken bones. I found him in the living room, surrounded by a fortress of paperwork. His once powerful frame was stooped, but his eyes were still bayonets. "Margaret," he said. The word was flat, devoid of warmth. He didn't even stand. "You're early." I set my cover on the table, the brass eagle catching the weak morning light. "I'm home, Dad. For good." I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him how I had honored the Harlan name in ways he couldn't imagine, how I had carried his legacy through fire and sand. Instead, he slid a folder across the polished oak of my grandfather's desk. "The farm's too much for you. You've been gone too long. I've made arrangements. We sell. I move to the veterans' home. And you," he paused, his gaze clinical, "you need help. The Army broke something in you, Maggie. Everyone sees it but you." My hands tightened on the edge of the desk. The wood was worn smooth, a testament to generations of Harlans. "This land is our legacy, Dad. Mom is buried out there. I won't let you erase her." He laughed. A short, bitter, ugly sound. "Legacy? You don't have a family left to pass it to. Your kids barely know your name." I'm doing what's necessary. The weeks that followed were a cold war fought with legal papers and bitter silences. My father, the architect of my sense of honor, had quietly filed a petition to declare me mentally unfit, citing the ghosts of my service against me. He wanted control. He wanted to sell the one place on earth that still tethered me to something real. I stood in that old kitchen, the scent of pine cleaner and aged wood a part of my DNA, and stared at the man who had forged me into steel, now trying to melt me down for scrap. I did not cry. Harlans don't cry. Instead, I made calls. I gathered records. I planned my operation. And I waited. Now, here we were. The Woodbury County Courthouse. The American flag hung behind the judge's bench, a silent, heavy witness to this domestic battlefield. I sat straight-backed, my silver hair coiled into a tight bun, my years of medals replaced by a quiet, unyielding dignity. My father, wearing his old uniform jacket like armor, glared at me with the same contempt he'd shown me when I chose West Point over being a farmer's wife. The judge cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the vacuum of silence. I met my father's gaze. For the first time in 54 years, I did not look away. He had no idea what was coming. I had lived in the shadow of his impossible expectations, sacrificed my life to make him proud. And now, armed with the truth I had unearthed from beneath the dust and decay of our past, I was ready to show Colonel James Harland exactly what kind of soldier his daughter had become. Those words from the judge, "Is that her?" hung in the air like gunsmoke, but my mind was already gone, dragged back through the decades by the sheer gravity of my father's stare. The courtroom dissolved. I was 12 again, standing in the raw Iowa wind behind the barn. Tears froze on my cheeks. I'd fallen from the hayloft, the snap of my wrist a sickening counterpoint to the rustle of the dry corn stalks. My father loomed over me, his shadow a long, unforgiving spear in the dying light. "Soldiers don't cry, Margaret," he snapped, his voice sharper than the jagged pain in my arm. "You want to be weak like your mother? Or do you want to be a Harland?" I bit my lip until I tasted the metallic tang of blood, swallowing my sobs as he forced me to run laps. Lap after agonizing lap until the sun bled out behind the horizon. That was the day I learned love in our house wasn't measured in affection. It was measured in endurance. My younger brother, Ethan, was the one who shone. He had our father's easy confidence, his broad shoulders. Dad pushed him, but with Ethan, there was a deep well of pride in his voice. I was the anomaly, the one who had to constantly prove I belonged. When Ethan died at 19, a training accident at Fort Benning, a faulty parachute, something inside my father shattered and was reforged into something harder, colder. He never spoke of it. Instead, he took the crushing weight of his expectations for Ethan and laid them squarely on my 17-year-old shoulders. "You carry your burden and his now," he told me at the graveside, the folded flag a dead weight in my hands. In that moment, I enlisted. My heart signed the papers long before my hand did. The years became a relentless forward march. West Point. Commissioning. Deployments that dragged me from the choking dust of Baghdad to the oxygen-starved peaks of Afghanistan. I climbed the ranks, not because it was easy, but because I was fueled by a desperate need to give my father no reason, no excuse, to doubt me. I missed what would have been Ethan's wedding. I missed my own daughter's first steps. My marriage to David crumbled into dust. "You're more married to the army and to proving something to that old man than you ever were to me," he said, the day he finally walked away. I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. When I finally retired 6 months ago, the farm was supposed to be a sanctuary. Instead, it was just another battlefield, one I had never truly left. The old white farmhouse still smelled of gun oil, polished oak, and the faint, ghostly trace of my mother's lavender sachets that Dad, in a rare moment of sentimentality, refused to throw away. The screen door issued its familiar, protesting creak as I stepped inside. My father sat at the kitchen table, a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold beside him. "You're back," he said, not looking up. Not a welcome. Not a hug. Just a flat statement of fact. "I'm staying, Dad." "This is home." He snorted, a sound of pure derision. "Home? You've been a ghost in this house for 30 years. You think you can just walk back in?" The arguments began as skirmishes and escalated into full-scale war. He criticized the way I made coffee, the placement of my boots by the door, the slight stoop in my posture after years behind a desk. But beneath the petty attacks, a darker strategy was unfolding. Missing documents. Late-night phone calls. Unfamiliar cars crunching up the gravel drive. When I confronted him, He deployed his weapon. "You've got that look in your eyes again, Maggie. The war followed you home. The VA doctors warned me. PTSD. Unstable. You're not fit to run this place." I stared at him, the man who had taught me to compartmentalize pain, to lock it away, now using my service as a weapon against me. Within weeks, I discovered his plan. A lawyer from Des Moines. A petition to the court. He was painting me as a broken soldier to have me declared incompetent. Worse, he was in talks with a veterans organization he had founded, an organization he secretly controlled, to transfer the farm's deed. The land my great-grandfather had cleared, where my mother had planted her roses, where Ethan and I had chased fireflies. He was going to sell off pieces of it to developers and funnel the rest into his own twisted legacy project, all while casting me as the tragic, broken daughter. One cold evening, after a dinner shrouded in a silence more hostile than any shouting match, I waited. I waited until his heavy footsteps faded up the creaking stairs. The barn was a tomb, dark and musty, thick with the ghosts of old hay and motor oil. I climbed into the loft, to the hiding place my mother had shown me years before a rainy April night when I was 14, the night she gave up. Beneath a loose floorboard, I found it, a small metal box, bolted to the joists. Inside, illuminated by the stark beam of my flashlight, were yellowed letters, bank statements, and a worn leather journal. My hands began to tremble, not from cold, but from rage. My father wasn't just surviving on his pension. He had built a secret empire, and he had spent decades ensuring I would never be a part of it. The betrayal burned hotter than any desert sun. This wasn't about land. It was about a lifetime of being measured, judged, and ultimately discarded. In that moment, kneeling in the dust and the dark, something inside me broke and reset. The obedient daughter died in that loft. She was done waiting for an approval that would never come. I closed the box, wiped the dust from my hands, and walked back to the house under a sky filled with cold, distant stars. My father had taught me discipline, resilience, and the price of weakness. Now, I would use every lesson he had ever drilled into me. I would fight him with the same cold, brutal precision he had always demanded. And he would finally understand the depth of the silence he had built between us. That night, after my father's predictable routine led him upstairs, I returned to the barn. In my hand was a crowbar, and in my heart, resolve colder than the Iowa wind rattling the tin roof. The old metal box came free with a groan of protesting metal, its surface a relief map of rust and neglect. I carried it to the kitchen table, setting it down under the single, naked bulb. The warm light cast long, dancing shadows across the cracked linoleum as I pried open the lid. The scent of aged paper, dry ink, and faint gun oil rose to meet me. Inside lay the secret life of Colonel James Harlan, a man far more calculating than the simple, pension-dependent soldier he pretended to be. Page after page revealed a meticulously constructed financial empire. Bank statements from offshore accounts detailed investments in defense contracting firms, vast land holdings across the Midwest, and shares in a private security company run by his old Vietnam cronies. The numbers were staggering. They made my military pension look like a child's allowance. For decades, while he had lectured me on the nobility of sacrifice, he had been quietly monetizing his military connections, pulling strings from the shadows long after he'd hung up his uniform. But the deepest cut, the one that severed the last thread of hope, came from a sealed envelope. Addressed to me, in his precise, slanted script. My hands shook as I unfolded the pages. They were dated 5 years prior. Never sent. Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. Or you've gone digging where you shouldn't. You always were too stubborn for your own good. I built this for the Harlan name, not for weakness. Your service was adequate. But a woman commanding men in combat was always a risk, one I worked to mitigate. A quiet word to a general here, a delayed promotion there. It was for your own protection as much as for the integrity of the army. Ethan would have carried this legacy properly. You fight like a Harlan, but you feel too much. Just like your mother. The words blurred. The ink swam before my eyes. I had suspected, but to see it laid bare in his own hand, it was a knife twisting in a wound I never knew was so deep. He had sabotaged me. The command position in Afghanistan that vanished. The promotion I lost in 2012 to a less qualified man. It was all his doing. All while I was thousands of miles away, bleeding for his approval. Deeper in the box, there were more horrors. Hospital records. A private investigator's report. My mother. It wasn't an accident, as he had always claimed with a stoic face. She had taken her own life. The report was a clinical, brutal account of her final years, the emotional isolation, the verbal cruelty, nights spent crying alone while he drank in his study, berating her for producing a soft daughter and then losing his perfect son. She had left a note he had destroyed, a note begging him to show me kindness. Rage. It was a pure, clean, focusing force. It settled in my chest like a well-aimed round. This wasn't greed. This was a systematic, lifelong campaign of diminishment. The man who taught me honor possessed none. He wanted to erase me from the family ledger and rewrite history with himself as the sole, heroic protagonist. I did not sleep. I photographed every document, every damning page, then carefully returned the originals to their metal tomb. As the first hint of dawn painted the frost-covered fields a pale gold, I was on a secure line to Captain Rebecca Torres, my former JAG officer, one of the few people on Earth I trusted without reservation. "Colonel Harland," she said, her voice sharp even at 0600. "This is financial manipulation, undue influence, and those blocked promotions border on illegal command influence. I know people. We can build a case." In the weeks that followed, I moved like I was planning a complex mission. I met with a respected estate lawyer in Des Moines, a man who had served in the same theater as my father. I reached out to 2 retired generals who remembered me not as James Harlan's daughter, but as a commander who got the job done. The pieces of my counteroffensive locked into place. I learned my father had been liquidating assets and, worse, had significant gambling debts from discreet trips to Minnesota, debts he planned to clear with the sale of our land. The veterans organization he championed? A shell corporation, designed to funnel the proceeds back into his own accounts while he played the role of noble patriot. Every revelation was another layer of steel around my heart. One evening, I sat on the old porch, wrapped in my mother's faded quilt, the smell of wood smoke on the air. The same porch where he had taught me to salute at age 6. I watched him through the window, hunched over his papers, age finally catching up to the man who refused to bend. He still saw the crying 12-year-old. He had no idea he was facing an adversary he himself had created, a woman who had learned his lessons far better than he ever intended. The court date was set. He believed he was walking into a simple competency hearing. He had no idea I was bringing a war chest. As I prepared my uniform for the hearing, not the dress blues, but a tailored civilian suit that still carried the posture of command, I felt a strange, profound calm. This wasn't about saving the farm anymore. This was about forcing my father to confront the truth of the man he was. He wanted a war. I would give him one he would never forget. The courtroom air was thick with it. Anticipation. My father sat at his table, his old uniform jacket a shield, its metals gleaming under the fluorescent lights as if they could deflect the truth. He shot me a look of pure, confident disdain. He still thought this was his battlefield. His rules. His victory. I kept my face a mask of calm, my hands folded on the table before me. The smell of old wood and paper files grounded me. Judge Anderson called the session to order. My father's lawyer was smooth, painting a picture of a broken, unstable veteran, a woman scarred by war, unfit to manage the historic Harland farm. "Colonel Harland Sr. has only his daughter's best interests at heart," he purred. "This is about protecting a legacy." When it was my turn, I rose slowly, deliberately, the way I entered a briefing room in Kandahar when lives were on the line. Rebecca Torres stood beside me, but this was my moment. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, "my father taught me 3 things: honor, duty, and truth. Today, I intend to honor all 3. One by one, I presented the evidence. The financial records of secret accounts. Proof of unauthorized sales. The private investigator's report on my mother's death. And finally, his own words. The courtroom became a vacuum, all sounds sucked out of it, as I read from the unsent letter. "You fight like a Harland, but you feel too much, just like your mother. Your words, Dad. While I was leading soldiers under enemy fire, you were pulling strings to hold me back. While I was earning my place, you were planning to erase me." He half rose from his chair, his hand trembling. "Margaret, that's enough. You're twisting things. I protected this family." Protected? For the first time, my voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the raw power of decades of suppressed pain. "You broke Mom. You desecrated Ethan's memory by turning him into a burden I had to carry. And you tried to break me. All of it, just so you could control the story of the great Colonel Harland. The judge called for order, but the dam had burst. I laid out how I had already secured the notes on the parcels he'd tried to sell. The farm was locked down. It was going nowhere. Then, the final, decisive blow. I will not be selling our land to developers, Your Honor. Instead, I am establishing the Harland Veterans Healing Ranch on the full 200 acres. A place where soldiers like me, carrying wounds no one can see, can come to heal. The barn will become a counseling center. The fields will grow food for the residents. And the Harland name will live on. Not as a monument to one man's control, but as a testament to redemption. My father stared, his mouth agape. The invincible colonel finally looked like what he was, an old, frightened man. Margaret, his voice was a dry rasp. You can't. That land is mine. I built everything. You built walls, I said quietly. I'm building bridges. You wanted me declared incompetent. The court now has all the evidence it needs to see who truly lacks the capacity for honest judgment. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. He denied my father's petition, upheld my authority over the estate, and ordered a full audit of his finances. The gavel fell like a rifle shot, a final, echoing salute. In the hallway, he approached me. The bailiff watched, but the fight had gone out of him. Up close, I saw the age spots, the tremor in his hands. I never meant for it to go this far, he whispered. You were supposed to be stronger than her. Stronger than me. I am, I answered. That's why I'm not destroying you. You can stay on the farm. In the guest house. But the decisions are mine now. This is your chance to be the father you never were. He searched my face for the obedient girl he had lost. She was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had survived his war. As I walked out of the courthouse, into the crisp Iowa air, I felt it. Not triumph. Peace. A quiet, methodical justice. Revenge wasn't the explosion I had imagined. It was the slow, steady work of rebuilding. My father would live with the ghosts of the empire he built in the shadows. I would use its foundations to build something in the light. The years that followed moved with the steady, unforgiving rhythm of the Iowa seasons. Today, 5 years after that day in court, I stand on the porch, a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The air smells of cut hay and purpose. Below me, the Harland Veterans Healing Ranch is alive. Laughter echoes from the barn, where a group of veterans sits in a circle, their faces a mix of old scars and new hope. In the fields, others work the soil, their hands finding peace in the honest labor of planting and reaping. My father lives in the guest house. He is 85 now, his commanding frame stooped and frail. He sits on his porch and watches. We rarely speak of the past. Some wounds are too deep for words. But sometimes, in the twilight, he'll look out at the life teeming across the land and nod. You did good, Margaret, he said last week, his voice a rough whisper. Better than I would have. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It is a daily, grueling choice. I have not forgotten. But I have chosen not to let his poison corrupt the final chapter of our story. He lost the power to break me, and in return, I gave him the dignity of watching something beautiful grow from the wreckage he created. My children have returned. Cautiously at first, but they came. Last summer, I taught my grandsons to fish in the pond where Ethan and I once played. The ranch saved them, the veterans often tell me. The truth is, building it saved me. Last week, I walked to the family cemetery at the edge of the property. I placed fresh wildflowers on my mother's grave and on Ethan's. I understand now, I whispered to them. Honor isn't about standing tall in a uniform. It's about standing up when it matters most, right here at home. As I turned to leave, I saw my father watching from his porch. He raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. It was the closest to a salute I would ever get from him. I waved back. The circle, jagged and brutal as it was finally closing. True revenge was never about destruction. It was about taking back the power to write your own ending. My father tried to erase my story. Instead, I rewrote our legacy. It's a legacy that will outlast us both, written not in stone or metals, but in the quiet healing of broken soldiers finding their way home. If this story has found a resonance in you, know that you are not alone. Whether you are a parent feeling betrayed, a child carrying the weight of a difficult past, or a veteran fighting a silent war, there is strength in choosing your own truth. What would you have done? Have you ever had to fight for your own story within your family? I'd be honored to hear from you in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from. Your stories remind me these battles are fought far beyond these Iowa fields. Thank you for walking this path with me. I hope it has offered some comfort, or at least the knowledge that even the hardest ground can be tilled for a new beginning. We have many more stories to share, stories of courage, redemption, and the quiet victories that define a life. If this resonated, please subscribe and join our community. Together, we can keep reminding the world that it is never too late to stand tall, to heal, and to build something better.